I'm so glad you could join me because it is the start of the fall season. I wanted to start delving into some of the haunted books that I have, and I thought we would start with something a little fun. And for those of you who are music or rock and roll lovers, this might interest you. Ghostly tales of musical legends, haunted, rock, and roll. On the front we have an electric guitar on a stand, on a stage, and there is a red curtain being pulled back in a ghostly skeleton hand. And this is by Matthew L. Swain. Let's read the back. Plug in the guitar, raise the curtain, and step on to the haunted stage. From rock and roll's pioneers to its contemporary rebels, the greatest names live on after death in unexpected and frightening ways. Discover thrilling stories of Michael Jackson, Jim Morrison, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Amy Winehouse, and many more rockers who've been seen haunting their favorite bars, clubs, and homes. Haunted Rock and Roll covers rock's entire paranormal legacy, allowing you to explore the famous faces, places, and legends that define one of the biggest cultural movements of all time. Experience true stories of rock star ghosts while enjoying trivia and insights from renowned ghost hunters and researchers. Whether they're making demonic deals for fame or being chased into the afterlife under mysterious circumstances, rockers have followed the same motto: live fast, die young, and leave a restless spirit. Matthew L. Swain is a journalist who currently works as a research writer at Penn State and is also the author of America's Haunted Universities. He has done freelance reporting for major newspapers and other publications. He lives in State College, Pennsylvania. Let's take a look inside. This was printed in 2014 by Llewellyn Publications of Woodbury, Minnesota. The dedication: for their love of good ghost stories and great music, I dedicate this book to my mother Judy and my aunts Janet Watson and Joyce Kobuck. In memoriam, Caitlin A. Katie Stevens, March 5th, 1993 to October 3rd, 2013. Very, very young. So we have different sections in the book. Section 1 is the rock star ghosts. Section 2 is haunted studios and concert venues. Section 3 is premonitions, signs, and omens of rock and roll. Section 4, rock and roll's most famous curses and mysteries. And that's it. I haven't really had time to look through this book completely. Sorry, Elvis. No offense, Mozart, but Robert Johnson is the first rock star. Johnson may also be rock's first ghost, or at least he may be the subject of rock and roll's first great ghost story. It's true that most rock historians will tell you that rock started with Johnson, the modern guitar hero who wails away on his Fender Stratocaster or sunburst Gibson Les Paul would not exist if it wasn't for a mysterious Delta bluesman named Robert Johnson. Nor would rock and roll exist, apparently, if it wasn't for Johnson's guitar mentor, the Devil. Little is known about the early life and career of Robert Johnson, whom critics and historians call the grandfather of rock and roll. See, I told you. What is even more frustrating for musicologists is that the facts about Johnson are so blended into the legend and rumor that it's hard to tell where Robert Johnson, the man, ends and where Robert Johnson, the myth, begins. But that's typical for the Mississippi Delta region, a boiling cauldron of myth and mystery. Emerging out of this bubbling froth of mystery are the somewhat accepted details that Johnson was born in Hazelhurst, Mississippi, in either 1911 or 1912. Most blues aficionados believe that he was born to Julia Dodds and Noah Johnson. His mother, however, was married to Charles Dodds, a well-off landowner and furniture maker who was, the story goes, forced off his property by a mob of whites after he dared to test the land rights of some white landowners. Early reports say that as a young man, Johnson enjoyed music, or maybe he enjoyed looking at the dozens of pretty women who circled the great bluesmen who played it. Whether it was the actual music or the ladies that attracted him, Johnson quickly discovered he had a slight problem. He never showed much proficiency at guitar. In fact, the people who heard him play said he was only a mediocre guitar player, and others said that this assessment was a bit too generous. That's quite the insult, isn't it? Undeterred, Johnson practiced and practiced, growing more desperate to learn blues guitar. He admired the smooth guitar players who traveled the circuit of bars and juke joints in the South, guys like Eddie James, Son House, one of the premier bluesmen of the day. Who could blame Johnson? There were few opportunities for a black man in the Deep South at the turn of the 20th century. He could pick cotton or pick guitar. For a talented guitarist, playing the blues was a way out of the brutal life of a sharecropper or farm laborer. The money, booze, and good times flowed relatively freely at juke joints, those bars and clubs that dotted the Delta landscape. For guys who could play the blues, but even that path wasn't assured, crowds knew what they wanted, and you either had it or you didn't. If you didn't, it was back to the farms and back to soul-breaking work, sweating under the merciless Mississippi sun. Johnson, the young wannabe guitarist, made no secret that he admired something else about the blues performers who crossed his path, their ability to attract women who seemed to hang on to every lyric and every note that came from them. The blues, it seems, may not have just given rise to rock and roll. It gave rise to rock and roll groupies. Son House, who was already a respected bluesman when Johnson was just starting, said he tried to help the upstart, but teaching the kid was hopeless. He was terrible. He didn't know a guitar lick from a lick of sense. Other sources said Son was not quite the benevolent blues guitar instructor. Rather than politely declining to help Johnson, House ridiculed Johnson at some crowded juke joints. He told Johnson that he just didn't have it. Johnson created more racket than music on his guitar, Son said, and he just did not have the indefinable spirit that unites musicians with instrument, the spirit that makes blues music the authentic art form that it is. The scolding from one of the great names in blues history may have been enough to scare the devil out of some players, but it seemed to scare the devil right into Johnson. No matter how bad the verbal berating was, the musician had to hand it to Johnson. He was determined to either find someone to teach him the blues or go to hell trying. They may have admired Johnson's art, but they weren't about to waste their time trying to teach those clumsy hands how to play. The best musicians pretty much left him alone or ducked behind the nearest wall or building when they saw the hungry, lanky, unteachable guitar player coming down the street. It is not known whether Johnson realized that the blues players had given up and exiled him from their inner circle. What is known is that Johnson seemed to exile himself. One day, however, Johnson up and left. He just disappeared. No one heard why he was leaving. No one knew his destination, and quite frankly, no one cared. Johnson had a reputation for being nice, but a little on the weird side. Me too, Johnson. Me too. According to Samuel Charter's biography on the guitar legend, Shines, a fellow blues musician and a buddy of Johnson's, described his friend. Robert was a very friendly person, even though he was sulky at times, you know. And I hung around Robert for quite a while. One evening he disappeared. He was kind of a peculiar fellow. The guitar players whom Johnson badgered for lessons must have let out a huge sigh of relief that could have been heard across the Delta when they realized the nice but talentless bluesman was gone. Johnson wasn't a blues has-been. He was a blues never was. At least, that's what they thought. About a year or so later, Johnson showed up again in the Delta. Well, the fellow looked like Robert Johnson, but when this familiar stranger started to strum and pick his guitar, it sure didn't sound like Robert Johnson. In those short 365 days, Robert had mastered the most complicated blues riffs, and even created his own intricate variations. His speed and accuracy produced dazzling licks that put the old veterans to shame. He must have found one hell of a teacher, the musicians whispered when they heard him play. Hell being an operable term. When Johnson started to strum and stretch, pick and pound that guitar, listeners said he played like a demon possessed, and they weren't necessarily trying to use an analogy. People sensed something odd, even evil, about this turn of events. The rumor quickly spread that Johnson never could have picked up this skill in such a short time. He must have sold his soul to the devil. There was a common myth in the Deep South that if you wanted something bad enough, the devil just might pay you a visit with an offer. All you needed for collateral was a soul. Another strange rumor swirled around the sudden talents of this guitar player. Some people said that late at night, Johnson would play his guitar in graveyards. It wasn't much of a stretch to guess that it wasn't good acoustics that Johnson was seeking out among the tombstones and mausoleums. The people believed this bluesman was on friendly terms with the spirits and demons that were said to hang out in those courtyards of the dead. One thing people agreed on was that Johnson was just the type of guy to make such a deal. He was desperate to become a blues guitarist. He was desperate to make some money. He was desperate to have the fawning attention of the women who crowded into juke joints to watch their stars. Everyone could see Johnson's signature on the dotted line of a contract with the devil. Johnson did nothing to dispel these rumors. He even said during a drinking session that he met the devil at the crossroads and pledged his soul if the devil could give him the power to be a great guitar player. As proof, Johnson gave the exact location of where the transaction took place. Some say Johnson met the devil at the crossroad near the Dockery Plantation one midnight. The Dockery Plantation, located between Ruleville and Cleveland, Mississippi, is one. It's also regarded as a metaphysical auction house, with the devil being one of the main bidders. According to the legend, Johnson traveled to the crossroads, guitar in hand, when he met up with Satan. Satan told Johnson he would give him the power to play guitar like a master. He just wanted his soul as payment. To raise the stakes, Satan said he wouldn't just be a good guitar player. Good guitar players were a dime a dozen in the South. No, Satan promised that Johnson would be the king of the Delta blues. Johnson agreed. He traveled back to Mississippi and relished the shocked looks on the faces of the bluesmen as he tore into licks that even they couldn't master. Maybe it was jealousy, or maybe it was the deep current of Christian beliefs that penetrated the soul of even the most hard-drinking, hard-living Southern bluesmen, but the musicians started to pry into Johnson's secret. You didn't have to look far to find signs of the pact with the devil. Johnson's lyrics are full of satanic imagery. He mentions Satan in at least 6 of his songs, and even describes an encounter with his satanic majesty in one song that sounds eerily similar to the rumors that were spreading around the South about this wickedly talented guitar player. He sang about walking with the devil in Me and the Devil Blues. In another song recorded in his last ever session, Johnson prophesied that his deal was about to be closed and it wouldn't be a pretty end. In Hellbound on My Trail, he sang about being followed by an evil spirit, a hellhound. Johnson wasn't the first blues musician to talk about hellhounds. His contemporaries and blues artists before him spoke about evil beings and bad luck that haunted their lives. They called them hellhounds, but most of the good citizens of Mississippi didn't need to guess what type of hellhound was on Johnson's trail. It was Satan, and he was coming to collect on a debt. The hellhound finally caught up to Johnson near Greenwood, Mississippi in 1938. Some say he drank too much whiskey after a series of gigs at a dance hall and died. Others say maybe Robert drank too much, but it was his messing around with another man's woman that did him in. According to this story, Robert was fooling around with the girlfriend or wife of the owner of a juke joint. The jealous lover decided to take care of Johnson once and for all and put poison, some say strychnine, in Johnson's whiskey bottle when he wasn't looking. There was one more explanation for the bluesman's sudden and horrific demise. Maybe the devil finally collected his final payment on the contract. After all, Johnson was reportedly 27 when he died. As we'll discover, it seems that a lot of contracts expire for rock stars at age 27. Rock historians say that Johnson was the first member of the notorious 27 Club, which we'll talk more about in an upcoming chapter. All of this is speculation, though. Whatever the actual cause, the guitarist fell ill. The illness lasted for days, and the suffering was terrible. He finally died on August 16th, 1938. Now, it's not just Johnson's mystical licks and blues-bending notes that haunt the crossroads of the Delta. The ghost of Johnson himself has been said to show up. How he appears differs in the tales told by people who claim they have had a ghostly encounter with the blues master. He is a shadow flitting right at the edge of darkness in some tales. Others say the ghost of an unhappy man is seen at the crossroads where Johnson made his deal. The spirit usually shows up at midnight. Still more reports come from other sites made famous by the Johnson legend. His grave sites, that seems odd, are hotspots for blues enthusiasts and ghost hunters. And by the way, grave sites is accurate. Oh, well, there you go. Like everything in Johnson's life, his final resting spot is cloaked in mystery. Perhaps to confuse the devil who was coming to collect on Johnson's debt. His friends and family buried Johnson's body in one of 3 different spots. One is near Greenwood, Mississippi. Another is in Quito, Mississippi. A third gravesite has been located north of Morgan City, Mississippi. These gravesites are favorites of ghost hunters seeking EVPs, or electronic voice phenomena. Many claim you can still capture a little of that blue spirit walking around the area. But, more often than not, the spirit of Robert Johnson is not captured on ghost hunting equipment or caught on a recording device. His spirit isn't even the typical apparition of a wispy, fleeting form of a person. The spirit of Robert Johnson is much more subtle. When you're at the crossroads or near his grave, ghost hunters say you get a feeling like someone is watching and waiting. Someone with a contract in hand. Who'll be the next, right? See, we got Elvis Presley. We've all heard about Elvis Presley and all of his hanging out in the afterlife, or not hanging out in the afterlife. Did Elvis even die? Let's see who else is in here. Oh, here we go. There's another person who may have sold his soul to the devil. Brian Jones, like the ghost of a Rolling Stone. Brian Jones is at the top of the list of tragic, enigmatic figures in rock and roll history. Though he was incredibly talented, his friends said he squandered that talent on booze and drugs. He was intelligent and creative, but spent most of his time with malcontents and hangers-on. Jones is an enigma that refuses to go away. A founding member of the Rolling Stones, Jones was born in Cheltenham, England, to two musically gifted parents. He was a natural musician, effortlessly learning how to play guitar and figuring out the intricacies of slide guitar. No easy trick. But that's just the beginning. During his career as a Stone, Jones played organ, marimba, recorder, saxophone, dulcimer, accordion, oboe, harpsichord, and autoharp. He even learned how to play the sitar, a complicated Indian stringed instrument, for songs like Street Fighting Man and Paint It Black. Jones's prodigious musical abilities were only matched, biographers say, by his drug and alcohol abuse. In a time when drugs were experimental, the multi-instrumentalist was the chief psychedelic laboratory technician for the Rolling Stones. That's quite a title, isn't it? Jones's drug use was one cause for a falling out with the rest of the Rolling Stones. Well, at least his inability to handle his drugs was one reason for the falling out. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, who were quickly becoming the band's leaders and principal songwriters, were losing patience with Jones's undependable performances and, sometimes, his antisocial behavior. I'll just add that when you're kicked out of the Stones for bad behavior, it's really saying something. Jones himself was disappointed with the band's drift from its blues roots to rock and roll. He considered the commercial rock that Mick and Keith were writing as selling out. A series of arrests and illnesses left the guitarist on even thinner ice. Eventually, Jones was asked to leave the band, although his bandmates let him make the decision on how he would like to leave, quit, or be fired. He told the public he had artistic differences with the Stones and that he would venture off on his own. It would be an eternal venture. The incident on the night of July 2nd and the morning of July 3rd, 1969 is now soaked in mystery and myth, hearsay and conjecture. The body of Brian Jones was discovered in a swimming pool at his estate in East Sussex. The estate was part of the farm once owned by Winnie the Pooh author A.A. Milne. The death was ruled an accident. More specifically, the coroner labeled it death by misadventure. Others aren't so sure. Witnesses have stepped forward to suggest that Jones was murdered, possibly by a few builders who were at the site of the home during renovation work. Another conspiracy claimed that there was no accident or homicide. Jones's death was caused by supernatural forces. Jones had grown fearful on the days leading up to his death, that he was somehow cursed. The Rolling Stones were no strangers to the world of black magic and the occult. They even named an album at Her Satanic Majesty's request. Perhaps Jones had felt that these dark forces were now arrayed against him. Friends of Jones said that he was convinced that a shaman had cursed him during a trip to Africa when he was recording a group of African drummers. One more report indicates that a chilling supernatural prediction was made before the guitar player's demise. The story told by writer R. Gary Patterson in the book Take a Walk on the Dark Side indicates that shortly before Jones's death, Mick Jagger and girlfriend Marianne Faithfull were tossing I Ching coins, a Chinese fortune-telling system. The I Ching experience a resurgence in the explorative 1960s rock and roll culture, and Faithfull quickly became a student. Basically, the person seeking guidance tosses a group of coins, usually 3 coins, and then consult a guide to match the fortune with the pattern of coins. 2 weeks before Jones died, Faithfull tossed the coins and got a combination that meant death by water. Jagger, a little disconcerted, asked Faithfull to toss the coins again. She got the same result. 2 weeks later, Jones drowned. But Faithfull said Jones wasn't really gone. In fact, he visited her. After Jones's death, Faithfull, already under the influence of drugs, fell into a deep depression. Jagger and Faithfull may have felt pangs of guilt because the apparent accident happened so soon after Jones's dismissal from the Rolling Stones, and they had ample time to warn him of their dire I Ching prophecy. Faithfull cut her hair to resemble the hairstyle of Jones. Once, when she looked into the mirror, Faithfull said she actually saw Brian Jones staring at her. Was it his ghost, or just a hallucination? Faithfull's drug use and depression resulted in an overdose that brought her to the edge of death. She slipped into a coma, and doctors weren't sure that she would survive. In her biography, Faithfull, however, she said that while she was in the coma, the spirit of Brian Jones appeared to her. Jones apparently convinced her that she had to return. Jones's ghost isn't just saving overdose victims. He may still be in the recording business too. During an interview with The Sun, a UK newspaper, psychic Tony Stockwell was speaking about his show, The Psychic Detective. The interview, which was recorded for accuracy's sake, was supposed to be just with Tony, but the reporter noticed someone else's voice on the tape. It may have been Jones's. While the psychic was speaking about an investigation into the death of Jones, the reporter noticed a certain wail on the tape during the playback. No one had heard the noise during the interview, and it didn't seem to have any mechanical origin. The inexplicable sound heard on the tapes came just as Stockwell said. Brian Jones was the guy who was found dead in a swimming pool. It was believed for years that he was at some sort of drug or alcohol-fueled party. The reporter decided to have the tape checked out, and experts agree that the voice was an EVP, or an electronic voice phenomenon. An expert who worked on White Noise, a movie about the dead contacting the living through EVPs, concluded that the tapes and the noise heard on the tapes were legitimate. Some of Jones's friends and associates do not have trouble believing that the spirit of the guitarist lingers and is eager to communicate. Jones was familiar with the occult. Kenneth Anger, a movie producer and Stones hanger-on, believed that Jones and the band were involved in witchcraft. He said that Jones, Keith Richards, and Anita Pallenberg, who was girlfriend to both Richards and Jones, had formed a little coven in the band. Well, how sweet. The occult unit within the Stones was Keith and Anita, and Brian Anger said, "You see, Brian was a witch too." Could the weird noise on the interview be an attempt by Jones to communicate his displeasure that the reason for his death was incorrect? Was he trying to alert the reporter about the murder? Or had the ghost of Jones become attached to the psychic? After all, lots of psychics talk about spirits following them home from their haunted environs. No one knows the answer to these questions for sure, but it does seem that if the spirit of Jones is reaching out to reinvestigate the incident, that message may have finally gotten through. In 2009, police reopened Jones's case to investigate those charges. According to Rolling Stone magazine, recent reports suggest not an accident but foul play. A deathbed confession of one of the partygoers has made it through the entertainment rumor mill. Several people who were close to Brian and were at the party have said they were threatened to not talk about Jones's accident. The real question is, will this investigation finally allow the restless spirit of one of the Rolling Stones' most restless members to rest in peace? Interesting. Janis Joplin. Take another piece of my haunt. Janis Joplin was a lonely girl from Port Arthur, Texas, who rode her soulful voice and creative genius out of a series of small-town miseries and into rock and roll stardom in one of the most stunning examples of artistic invention and reinvention. Along the way, though, she left more than pieces of her heart as she traveled gypsy-like from city to city, hotel room to hotel room, and auditorium to auditorium. She left a piece of her soul in spots, too. In 1970, Joplin died of a heroin overdose in a hotel room. She was 27, another member of the Cursed 27 Club. Years before, Joplin had somewhat revealed her self-fulfilling prophecy when she said, "People, whether they know it or not, like their blues singers miserable. They like their blues singers to die afterwards." Well, that's a horrible thing. She was one of the big three rock stars who died due to overindulgence in the early 1970s. Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison broke on through to the other side too. I see what he did there. Many paranormal experts suggest that when young people die suddenly, they often do not make the transition to the other side peacefully. These souls want to remain in this world, or perhaps they just can't process what happened. Sometimes young souls who pass on think they're too young to die. Joplin, who is described by most who knew her as a tenacious but carefree spirit, may fit that description. She was full of energy, she loved life, and she wasn't ready to surrender just yet. Hotel room haunt. The stories about Janis Joplin's ghost began almost immediately after her death. According to folklorists and ghost hunters in Los Angeles, Joplin passed away in room 105 of the Landmark Hotel, now called the Highland Gardens Hotel, located close to the Sunset Strip, which was a musical mecca in the late 1960s. The hotel room became a convenient place for rock stars and celebrities to stay, and a great place to party. The Sunset Strip was party central in the 1960s. Spirits were high, the music was loud, and drugs flowed easily from the Strip. That's why Joplin stationed herself at the hotel, so she was near the music and near the action. It all ended for Joplin in that hotel, and now the room where she stayed and where they found her lifeless body has gone from party hotspot to paranormal hotspot. Numerous Numerous guests who have stayed in room 105 have reported a mix of strange happenings and paranormal outbreaks during their visits, ranging from merely odd to the wildly outrageous. Since no one has ever reported seeing an apparition, it's hard to tell who or what is really behind the activity, but the blame seems to fall on poor Joplin, something she's probably used to. When witnesses describe the paranormal activity in the room, it does sound like Janice's M.O., though Joplin, or Pearl, as her friends called her, had a mischievous side, and the activity has a practical joke quality to it. People have complained that the phones ring, and when they answer, there's no one on the other line. Lights turn on and off by themselves, too. The temperature of the room also varies wildly. Sometimes it's too cold, sometimes it's too hot. The thermostat doesn't seem to help. To paranormal researchers, temperature fluctuations can indicate the presence of supernatural forces. When a spirit enters the physical plane, the energy is pulled from the space, and the temperature drops, according to paranormal experts. When the spirit exits, the temperature quickly returns to normal, causing a spike in heat. Friends describe Janice as a force of nature, so it's no surprise to them that she could be a force of supernature who messes with the temperature settings in a room. There are also reports that synchronistic events have occurred that are tied to the singer's life and career. One guest wrote in a review of her stay in the room that the visit had been filled with hints that Joplin still haunted it. The guest had downloaded a computer app that, according to the app developer, can detect the presence of ghosts or spiritual entities by flashing random words. The guest said the word Texas flashed on the screen of her phone, as well as the word Mama. Neither the guest nor her husband figured out the connection, but a quick check of Janice's bio on the internet allowed all the pieces of the puzzle to fall in place. Janice was from Texas and had an intense love-hate, but mostly hate relationship with the state. Of course, she was partial to the word Mama, too. Used it in lyrics and song titles. She even had an album named I Got Dem Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama. This couple's excursion into haunted rock and roll jibes with a lot of other encounters in room 105, but the paranormal energy apparently isn't confined to the room. Pictures in the lobby fall off the wall and doors slam without any apparent cause. The phones also ring erratically with no caller on the other end of the line. The debate continues about whether this means Joplin is actually haunting the hotel at all. Others say that it would be just like Janice to wander the halls looking for a little mischief. Studio haunts. Joplin didn't leave just one haunted spot. She left a trail of haunts. Most of her friends and colleagues aren't surprised. Joplin had a roaming spirit in life and in death. Sunset Sound Studio 1, where Joplin spent the last remaining hours of her life, is reportedly one of the spots in LA where the singer's spirit likes to hang out with kindred musical spirits. One rock group, Transmatic, was recording in the studio and was hoping a little of the musical magic that shaped Joplin's career would rub off on their own musical ambitions. And it did, but in ways the band really wasn't expecting. Transmatic's lead singer told a newspaper reporter that during the recording session, weird occurrences happened. The band had laid down some tracks digitally and they sounded fine. But later, when the band listened to the tracks again, the instruments were out of tune. Neither the band nor the engineers who were most familiar with the equipment had an explanation for the phenomena. The band painstakingly re-recorded the tracks. Since Jim Morrison's ghost is one spirit suspect who haunts the studio, some theorists blame the Doors' lead singer for the out-of-tune instruments, but others see Pearl's handprints all over the haunted activity. Joplin, who was a bit of a purist, may have been messing with the band for going digital and using all that fancy electronic equipment.